Rob here at etrailer.com, and today you're going to be taking a look at the Timbren rear suspension enhancement on our 2015 Toyota Sienna. Now, there's a lot of different reasons why you'd want a suspension enhancement on the back of your van. Part of the reason may be that you're towing a trailer. Once you put that heavy weight on the back, it's going to push down on the back end of the van. Put a lot of strain and stress on the suspension, not to mention anybody riding in the van is going to be extremely uncomfortable because the suspension isn't going to have enough travel and we're going to end up bottoming out. All that feeling is going to resonate through the seats, and again, it's just not going to be very comfortable. But since the back end is getting pushed down, the front end is going to rise up, which brings up a few more problems. Our tires start to wear unevenly, our alignment is kind of off, our headlights are pointing in the wrong direction, and we're going to lose our braking and turning power because the tires aren't going to have as much contact on the ground. So right now, we don't have anything loaded up in our van, so we're going to take a few measurements to see kind of a reference point of where we're at, and then we'll load it up. So we have our Sienna parked at a pretty much level ground here, again with nothing extra in the back. And if I measure from the ground to the top arch of the wheel well, I'm getting right about 31 inches. Now if we move up to the front, we're getting about 30.5 inches. So let's go ahead and load up some weight in the back and see what it does. So we went ahead and loaded up our cargo carrier, just like if you were going to load up going on a camping trip, or it's going to simulate the same effect if you have a lot of gear in the back, or if you have a lot of tongue weight from your trailer. But we can already visually see without me measuring that the back end did drop quite a bit. So if I measure from the same point, from the ground to the top of the wheel well arch, we're actually right about 29 inches, so it dropped a full 2 inches in the back. And on the front, we can see that this gap is actually larger, which means the front end is getting stretched up. And again, if I measure from the same point, we're actually up to 31 inches, so it did raise it up a little bit. But let's go ahead and take our van out on our test course and see how it handles. As we go over our bumps, I can really feel the load in the back. It's bouncing harder than normal, and I need to slow down because if I go too fast, I end up bottoming out. As I go through our slalom course, I can feel that the steering is kind of loose. It does not react as fast, and every time I go into the turn, the van wants to lean hard to one side. Now we have the same load in our Sienna that we had before, but now we have our Timbrens installed. So I'll go ahead and take our measurement again, and you can see that there still is a little bit of squat, but it did bring it up about 1/2 inch from without them. Now we'll go ahead and move to the front and see what it did up there. And in the front, it's actually back right to the factory ride height, so we don't have to worry about that stretch in the front. But now that we have everything loaded up, let's take it back on our test course and see how it handles now. This time as I go over the bumps, I still notice they're there, but it's much less jarring feeling. In general, I feel a lot more in control of the van. And back on our slalom course, I still feel the load, but the steering is much more responsive. It no longer feels loose, and I don't feel that hard lean anymore. To begin our installation, we want to remove our wheels and tires off the back end. Then we want to put either a jack or a jack stand, just so there's a little bit of pressure on the rear shock. Now ours is on a lift, so I'm going to be using a pole jack. And again, you just want a little bit of tension. You don't want to push the whole axle up really tight. You just want enough just to take a little bit of that weight off. And we'll move to the inside of our shock, and we're going to have a nut that's holding it in place. We need to remove that, so we grab a 19mm socket and pull it out. Now there's going to be a large plate washer. You want to hold on to the washer and the nut, and we'll set it aside for right now. Then we should be able to grab our shock and just push it off the stud, and I'm just going to push it forward so it's off the stud and out of the way. If you're having a little bit of trouble moving it off the stud and maybe kind of stuck on that bushing, you can grab a pry bar and come in right in between the shock and the mount here and just push it off until you can get it all the way off. Now to make your installation easier, we are going to be doing this both sides at the same time. So everything we do over here, we're going to repeat over on the other side of our van. Just again, keep in mind you are going to need 2 jack stands because we want to support the shock mounts on each side. Now once you have both shocks removed from each side, we're going to slowly lower the jacks down, and you can see that the axle is actually going to come down with it, and there's a small gap on our coil spring from where the spring perch is. That's okay, that's what we want. We want that gap to open up so we can actually get the spring out. And once you have it lowered all the way down, if you run out of jacks where the axle's all the way down and it's just free spinning, that's okay. I do suggest just putting your jack right under there with just a little bit of tension so we don't have to worry about anything falling. Most cases, your coil spring still will have a little bit of tension in there. You're not going to be able to grab it by hand as easily, but if it does come out, just go ahead and grab it and we can pull it out. You just want to pay attention to how it's sitting in there and try your best to get it in the same position when we go to put it back in. This right here is where you want the end of that coil to sit. Again, it's just a reference, so once we take it out, we don't have to worry about clocking it right. We just want the end of the coil to land on the bottom right here. Now again, the springs are in there pretty tight, they're under some tension, so I suggest grabbing yourself a decent sized pry bar, and I like to come in on the bottom coil and pry upward, because you can see that bottom coil starting to lift up, and really if we can get that last coil over that center hump, the rest of it should come down pretty easily. But you just want to be careful, because again, it is under quite a bit of tension. And you just want to keep working at it until you get that spring out. Now that I have it over that center hump, you can see it did kind of get stuck, which that's okay. Let's take our pry bar, pry it out the rest of the way. And this rubber piece comes out, that's all right. Just make sure you hold on to it, and we do put it back before we put our spring back in place. At this point, we want to grab all of these pieces out of our kit. We'll have our spring, a nut plate, a lock washer, an Allen bolt, and then a top plate washer that's going to have a little lip on it. We want to take our plate washer with the lip facing upward. We'll line it up on our spring that has the metal sleeve inside. On the other side, we're going to have a large hole, and if we look inside, we'll see a washer. It's a little hard to see, but we want to make sure that the washer is covering the hole and we get all of the pieces to line up together. Just going to hold it like this. I'll grab an extension with a 5/16 Allen bit, and I'm going to take my Allen bolt. I'll slide my lock washer over it, and now we want to take our extension and our bit and feed the bolt through, but you want to make sure that it goes through that flat washer on the inside, goes through the spring, and it comes out the top of this plate washer. We'll grab our nut plate and we'll take all of this over to the car where we can put it in. So right where we move the spring, on top here we're going to have a large hole. We want to feed that nut plate in so the threads are somewhat in the middle there. And then our upper plate, you'll notice that lip that it has, we want it to go around this section that's sticking out on the spring perch up top. So just lift up our spring assembly. And I'm going to grab the top of it with my hand just going over the top, and I'll use my extension just to get everything started by hand. Get it pretty well centered on there until it's at least snug and it's not going to move around. And then we can tighten it up all the way. But again, you want to make sure that that cup goes around that part that's sticking out so we don't have to worry about it shifting. And then we can use that same extension and that 5/16 Allen. Tighten it up. You just want to make sure that the spring or the plate isn't going to be spinning if we grab it. Now we're going to grab each one of our springs. We're going to grab the lower section of our Timbren assembly as well as the long hex Allen bolt that's going to go through it. Now I like to get this in the spring before we put it in because it's going to make it extremely difficult to try to finagle this in between the coils. So what I want to do is take the bolt, make sure it's going through the top, coming out the large opening at the bottom. And if you remember, this coiled section here is the bottom of the spring. We want that flat section facing up. So I'm going to hold the bolt in, and I'm actually just going to take a zip tie. I'm going to run it through the bolt hole, have it come out the bottom, and I'll lower it down into my spring, and I'm just going to zip tie it to the side. That way it'll be a lot easier to get everything in place and not have to worry about it falling out. Now you want to do this with both your springs, and again, we're just going to temporarily put that piece inside, and if your bolt falls out, it's all right. We can always put that in later. That'll be a little bit easier to put in than this large piece. Now we can grab our spring, and I'm going to lower my support jack till it's all the way down, and we can get our spring in place. Now, as you can see, it is going to be a pretty tight fit. So what we want to do is we want to lift up while we're pushing towards the front. Now, once you have your spring fully seated, again, you want to double check that lower coil to make sure it's sitting in the right spot, and make sure that the rubber seal is up there and you didn't forget to put it in. But since it is going to be so tight to put the spring in, I do suggest getting a really big pry bar, maybe an extra set of hands to help you, or if you can, go rent a spring compressor, and it'll make it a lot easier because we can actually compress the spring, make it smaller, and not have to worry about all the tension that's on it. Now we'll go ahead and take our pair of cutters. We're going to cut our zip tie off and get rid of it. I want to help guide this spacer down towards the bottom of the spring, and if your bolt did fall out, again, it's all right. We'll put it in now. And there's going to be a hole at the bottom of the spring perch here. We're going to make sure that bolt goes all the way through. With our bolt coming through, we'll grab our plate washer, slide it over our bolt. We'll grab the lock nut out of our kit. We'll just loosely install it so that plate won't fall off. Then we can come back and tighten up all the hardware. For our Allen bolt, I'm going to use a 7/32 Allen bit to tighten it up. And then to hold the nut on the bottom, I'm going to be using a 9/16 wrench. We just want to try to get this as centered as we can, so we're just going to sit right in the middle of the spring. So once we put everything back together, this will make contact with the rubber on our Timbren on the upper section. At this point, if you have both sides done, we can raise up the rear axle using our jacks or jack stands. And again, you kind of want to do it evenly side to side. That way one side doesn't go up too fast, causing any problems. Once you have it high enough, go ahead and slide our shock back into place. Should slide back on pretty easily. Remember to put your plate washer back on, and then we'll put that nut back in place as well. Then we can take our 19mm socket and tighten up that nut. Now at this point, we can lower down our jack stands, remove them, and put our wheels and tires back on, and that'll finish up your installation and your look at the Timbren rear suspension enhancement on our 2015 Toyota Sienna.